The city of Harlow had a name it whispered only after dark, and that name was Cassian Varro. Not in newspapers, not on police reports, not anywhere a reasonable person would think to look. But if you sat long enough in the right bar or worked long enough in the wrong neighborhood, you heard it eventually. The way you heard thunder before the storm actually hit. A rumble, a warning, something electric in the air that made the hairs on your arms stand up for no reason you could explain. Cassian Varro, 41 years old, the kind of man who walked into a room and the room rearranged itself around him without anyone meaning to let it. And on a Tuesday night in late October, he was sitting in a corner booth at Salvatore's, eating a plate of linguine and watching a girl named Penny Holt make the worst mistake of her life, without even realizing it. Now, before we get into what happened that night, you need to understand something about Penny. She was 22. She'd been waitressing at Salvatore's for 8 months. Not because she loved it, not because she planned to do it forever, but because the nursing program at Harlow Community College cost money, and money didn't appear out of thin air just because you needed it. She split her rent 4 ways in a 2-bedroom apartment 2 blocks from the train station. She bought the generic brand of everything. She kept a savings jar on her kitchen counter with a sticky note on it that said RN by 30 because 22 felt too ambitious, and she had learned not to promise herself things she couldn't keep. She had brown hair. She kept in a ponytail during shifts. She had a habit of chewing on the end of her pen between tables. She was the kind of person most people looked past without meaning to be cruel. Just background noise. Just someone who refilled your water glass and smiled when you didn't tip well enough. Except she had this thing about her. This one thing. When something was wrong, she couldn't pretend it wasn't. That was her greatest strength. And on that Tuesday night in late October, it was also the thing that changed her life entirely. His name was Derek Pruitt. He was 34, broad-shouldered in the way men get when they spend a lot of time at the gym and want everyone to know it. He wore a sport coat over a collared shirt with the top 2 buttons open. He had the kind of job title that sounded more important than it was. Regional sales director for a pharmaceutical distribution company, and he talked about it the way people talk about things they've decided define them. He'd been dating a woman named Tricia for almost 2 years, and tonight, apparently, was some kind of anniversary dinner. Penny had taken their table at 7:15. She'd gotten their drink order, brought the bread basket, recited the specials with the professional warmth she'd trained herself to project even on nights when her feet hurt. She'd noticed, in the practiced way waitresses notice things, that Tricia was nervous, fidgeting with her napkin, smiling a half-second too late after everything Derek said, the way people smile when they're listening but also bracing for something. By 7:45, Penny understood why. She'd been passing their table with a tray when she heard it. Not loudly, not at a volume anyone else in the room would have caught. Derek Pruitt leaned across the table, his voice low and controlled and completely certain of itself, and he said, "You need to stop bringing this up. I'm serious, Tricia. You're lucky I'm still here. You know what women your age don't understand. Gratitude." Penny kept walking. She set the tray down at table 11. She smiled at the couple there, asked if they needed anything else, turned, and went back toward the service station. She told herself it wasn't her business. She refilled a water pitcher. She told herself couples fight. People say ugly things, it doesn't mean anything. Then Tricia excused herself to the bathroom, and Derek Pruitt picked up Tricia's phone from the table. Just picked it up, like it belonged to him. Scrolled through it with the total ease of a man who had never once questioned his right to do exactly this. Penny watched from the service station. Her jaw tightened. When Tricia came back and reached for her phone, Derek was already sliding it back. Casually, smoothly, with the practiced motion of someone who'd done it before. "Everything okay?" Tricia asked. "Fine," Derek said. "I was just checking the time." Her phone had been face up on the table the whole night. There was a clock on the wall directly above their booth. At 8:10, things escalated. Penny didn't hear the beginning of it. She was in the kitchen, but she came back out and could feel the shift in the air before she even reached their section. That pressure change, like when the temperature drops before a storm. The couple at the next table had stopped talking, The busboy had found somewhere else to be. She slowed as she approached. Derek was leaning forward. His voice was still low. He was smart enough for that. But there was something in it now that wasn't there before. A current. The particular tone of a person who has decided to stop performing patience. "I said drop it," he said. "You're making a scene." "I'm not making anything," Tricia said. Her voice was shaking, and she was trying very hard to make it not shake, and that effort was heartbreaking in a way Penny felt in her sternum. "I just want to know why." "Why what?" "Why I'm tired of explaining myself to someone who can't hold a basic conversation without getting emotional." He sat back, crossed his arms. "This is exactly what I mean, Tricia. This is why I don't tell you things, Derek. Keep your voice down. Do you see anyone else in here making this kind of spectacle? You're embarrassing yourself." Tricia's eyes were glossy. She was pressing her lips together, that specific way women press their lips when they are absolutely determined not to cry in public. Penny stood there for 1 second. Then she walked to the table. "Can I get you folks anything?" she said. Bright voice. Service smile, making full and deliberate eye contact with Derek Pruitt because she wanted him to feel seen. Not as a customer, as a thing she had observed and categorized. "We're fine," he said flatly, not looking at her. "Actually," Tricia started. "I said we're fine," still not looking at Penny, looking at Tricia, saying the words to Penny but directing them at Tricia, which was its own kind of ugliness. Penny turned to Tricia directly. "Ma'am, can I bring you anything?" A pause. Derek's head turned slowly. She said no, he said. His voice had dropped another register. "Are you hard of hearing, or do you just not understand how this works? We don't need anything. Do your job and leave us alone." "Of course," Penny said. She wrote something on her notepad, tore the slip off, and set it face down next to Tricia's water glass. Then she walked away. What she'd written was the number for the Harlow Women's Resource Center. She didn't plan it. She didn't think it through. She just did it because her hands did it before her brain could argue. She expected that to be the end of it. It was not the end of it. Derek Pruitt picked up the slip of paper, turned it over, read it, and then he stood up. He was a large man. She'd clocked that when they sat down. Standing, moving through the restaurant toward the service station, his face arranged into an expression that was not quite rage, but the very precise thing that lives right next to rage. Controlled, cold, entirely committed. "Hey," he said. Penny looked up. "What is this?" He held the paper up, not loudly. He was still performing calm, still playing the role of the reasonable man. But his eyes weren't calm. "Who gave you the right to put something like this next to my girlfriend?" "I can take it back if she doesn't want it," Penny said. "That's not the question I asked." "I think it is, actually." His eyes narrowed. "You think this is funny? You think it's your place to interfere in something you know nothing about?" "I'm not interfering. I'm a waitress. I wait on people. That's what I did. Don't get smart with me." He stepped closer. Not much, just enough. That small recalibration of proximity that was its own kind of threat. "I want to speak to your manager, and I want to make sure you understand that this," he held up the paper, "is going to cost you your job. Do you understand me? Do you understand that?" Penny didn't answer immediately, because she was looking past his shoulder, at the corner booth, where a man she had not properly looked at before, a man who had been eating alone, quietly, for the last hour, had gone very, very still. Cassian Varro had been still for several years now. That was how he thought about it. After his wife died, after the organization went through the thing it went through, after he'd come out the other side of it somehow intact in body, if not exactly in anything else. He had made a decision to go still, to run his operations, to keep his agreements, to hold the city in the particular balance that only he had ever been able to hold it in, and to feel very little about very little. It had been working, more or less. He hadn't expected to sit down for a quiet dinner on a Tuesday night and end up watching a 22-year-old waitress in a ponytail hand a phone number for a women's shelter to a woman she didn't know, in front of a man who frightened her. He'd watched the whole thing. He saw her hesitate at the service station. He saw the moment she made her choice. He saw her write the number without looking at her pad, because she had it memorized, which meant she'd done this before, or at least thought about doing it before, which meant it mattered to her in a way that wasn't just impulse. He watched Derek Pruitt stand up and cross the room toward her. Cassian set down his fork. I asked you a question, Derek said, and his voice had crossed now into something less careful, less controlled. Do you understand what I'm telling you, or do you need me to make it simpler? Sir, if you'd like to speak to the manager, I'm speaking to you. I want you to understand that people who stick their nose into things that don't concern them face consequences. That's not a threat, that's just life. You should learn that. She understands, said a voice behind him. Derek turned. Cassian Varro was standing 4 feet away. He hadn't made a sound crossing the restaurant. He was wearing dark slacks and a black sweater, and he had his hands in his pockets. And he looked like the most relaxed person in the room, and that was somehow the most unsettling thing about him. This doesn't involve you, Derek said. I'm aware. Then walk away. I'm not going to do that, Cassian said pleasantly. The pleasantness was not warm. It was the pleasantness of a man who has so much certainty about the outcome of things that the process no longer concerns him. I'd like you to go back to your table, settle your bill, and leave. Derek stared at him. He was making the calculation men like Derek Pruitt always made, sizing up the man in front of him, running the math on whether this was a situation he could win. He decided it was. Who the hell do you think you are? He said. Cassian didn't answer that. He looked past Derek to one of his men. Penny hadn't even noticed the 2 men seated at a table near the door. That was how good they were at not being noticed, and gave the smallest possible nod. One of them took out a phone. Your name is Derek Pruitt, Cassian said conversationally. Regional Sales Director, Mercer Pharmaceutical Distribution. You drive a gray Audi, you're 6 months behind on your storage unit in the Millwick district, and your ex-wife's attorney filed a restraining order application in April of last year. He tilted his head slightly. It was denied, but it was filed. The color left Derek Pruitt's face. I'm going to ask you one more time, Cassian said, with the same pleasant tone, the same unhurried certainty. Please go back to your table. The restaurant was very quiet. Derek Pruitt went back to his table. He and Tricia left 11 minutes later, without speaking to Penny or to the manager. Tricia looked back once as they went through the door. Her expression was something complicated that Penny couldn't fully read, gratitude and fear, and something like exhaustion. Penny stood behind the host stand and breathed. Are you all right? She looked up. Cassian Varro was standing in front of her. Up close, in full light, he was not what she'd expected. She'd expected cold. He was something more complicated than cold, like a room that had been cold for a long time and had only just begun very cautiously to warm. I'm fine, she said. Thank you. You didn't have to do that. I know. He was going to have me fired. He was not going to have you fired, Cassian said. He's not capable of it. Men like that have less power than they pretend to. Most of the volume is performance. Penny looked at him for a moment. Is that something you know from experience? On which side? His mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile but was adjacent to it. Both at different points. She nodded slowly. Well, thank you. How long have you been writing those numbers down? She paused. About 6 months. I keep it memorized. There's a second one for the emergency hotline if I think it's more urgent. Tonight, I thought. She stopped. I don't know what I thought. I just knew she needed to have it. Cassian looked at her for a long moment. What's your name? Penny. Penny Holt. Cassian Varro. He held out his hand. She shook it, and his grip was firm and even, and he didn't hold it a half-second too long the way men sometimes did to establish something. He just shook her hand and let go. I know your name, she said, before she'd fully decided to say it. He raised an eyebrow, barely. I've worked 2 blocks from the Varro building for 8 months, she said. People talk. What do they say? That you own the city. People exaggerate. Do they? He looked at her again with that same quality of careful attention she'd noticed across the restaurant, the way he looked at things like he was actually trying to understand them, which was rarer than it should have been. Do you have a shift tomorrow? He asked. 4 to close. My driver will bring something to the restaurant. Severance pay, in a sense, in the event your manager was made to feel pressure you aren't aware of, and a number, not a hotline. The almost smile again. Mine. If Derek Pruitt or anyone like him becomes a problem again. I don't. She stopped. Started again. I don't usually take things from strangers. That's wise, he said. But I'm less of a stranger than I was 20 minutes ago. She looked at him. At the restaurant behind him that had slowly resumed its normal noise, silverware and conversation and the distant sound of the kitchen. At the two men near the door who were pretending not to be listening. "What is it you actually want?" she asked. It came out more direct than she meant it to. She braced slightly. He seemed to appreciate the directness. "Nothing," he said. "I watched you do something that cost you something. For a woman you don't know, I don't see that often." A pause. "I wanted to make sure it didn't cost you more than you could afford." She stood with that for a moment. "And the number," she said, "is for your safety, not mine." His voice was even. Not reassuring in the way people try to reassure, not warm and soft and insistent, just factual. Women who do what you did sometimes create enemies they don't expect. I'd prefer you had a resource. Penny Holt looked at Cassian Varro across the host stand of Salvatore's restaurant, and she made the same kind of decision she'd made earlier, the kind where her hands knew before her head did. "Okay," she said. He nodded once. "Turn to go." "Mr. Varro," she said. He turned back. "The linguine here is actually really good," she said. "In case you were worried I'd let it get cold while all of that was happening." This time the expression on his face was definitely a smile. Small, controlled, like something that didn't get let out very often. "It was excellent," he said. "Thank you, Penny Holt." He walked back to his table, settled the bill in cash with a tip that would make her month significantly easier, and left. She thought about it for the next 3 days. Not obsessively, not in the way people think about things they've decided to turn into something. More in the way you think about a door you've never noticed before suddenly being visible. You didn't go through it. You're not planning to go through it. You're just aware now that it exists. On Friday, a black car pulled up in front of Salvatore's at 4:15 p.m. A man she didn't recognize came in, asked for Penny by name, and handed her an envelope. Inside was $300 in cash and a card with a phone number. Nothing else. No name. Just the number. She put the card in her wallet, behind her library card, where she kept things she wasn't sure what to do with. She kept it there for 2 weeks. The call she made was not about Derek Pruitt. It was about something else entirely. Something that happened on a Thursday night when she was walking home from a late shift and a man she didn't recognize followed her for 6 blocks before she turned into the 24-hour laundromat on Clover Street and stood in the fluorescent light with her heart in her throat, waiting until he moved on. She didn't call the police. She'd lived in Harlow long enough to know how that math worked. She called the number. It rang twice. Penny. Not a question. He'd saved her number. Something happened, she said. She was still in the laundromat. An older woman was folding sheets in the corner and not looking at her. I don't think I'm in danger right now. I'm in the laundromat on Clover and 5th. But there was a man. What did he look like? She described him. Cassian was quiet for a moment in the way that meant he was thinking, not that he wasn't listening. "Don't leave until someone gets there. 7 minutes. You don't have to, Penny." His voice was patient. "It's 7 minutes. It was actually 5. One of the men from the restaurant, she recognized him now, came through the door, walked the perimeter of the block with 2 other men she hadn't seen before, and then came in and told her the route was clear. He had a car waiting. He took her home and waited outside until her lights were on, and she had sent a text to the number, 'I'm inside.' 'Thank you.' The reply came back in under a minute. Lock the deadbolt." She did. She stood in her kitchen next to the jar that said RN by 30, and she thought about what it meant that a man who ran the criminal infrastructure of an entire city knew she didn't always lock her deadbolt. She thought, this is complicated. She also thought, I've been alone in this city for 4 years, and not one person has shown up in 5 minutes. The next time she saw him in person was not by arrangement. She was in Paulson's Market on a Saturday morning, trying to decide between 2 brands of coffee, when she looked up and he was at the end of the aisle. He was holding a basket with very ordinary things in it: bread, lemons, what appeared to be a specific type of sparkling water, and he was reading the label on a jar of pasta sauce with the same focused attention he apparently brought to everything. He looked up, saw her, the almost smile. "I didn't take you for a Paulson's person," she said. "I live 2 blocks away." "So do I think." "I know," he said. She looked at him. "That's either very comforting or extremely alarming. I'd argue it's practical." She shifted her weight. Are you always this? She gestured vaguely. This what? I don't have the exact word, sure, of everything, all the time. He considered that, most of the time, a pause. Not always, when not. He looked at her across the aisle of a grocery store, holding sparkling water and pasta sauce in the ordinary Saturday morning light, and he said, occasionally I find myself in situations I didn't plan for. He was not talking about the pasta sauce. She understood that. She picked the second coffee, the slightly more expensive one, because her last paycheck had been better than expected, and sometimes small extravagances were their own kind of insistence on being alive, and she dropped it in her basket. Well, she said, I'll see you around, Mr. Varro. Cassian, he said. She paused. Cassian, she repeated. She walked toward the register. She was almost certain he watched her go, and she was almost certain she didn't mind. What came after was not a romance in the traditional sense. Not flowers and candlelit dinners and declarations. Not the version of things that gets smoothed out and made clean in the telling. It was quieter than that, and also at times significantly more dangerous. There were 3 separate occasions in the 4 months that followed when Penny Holt found herself in a situation that had no business touching someone who waitressed at an Italian restaurant and was saving up for nursing school. Men who came to Salvatore's and asked for her by name. A note left on her apartment door. A conversation she overheard at the end of a shift that she recognized, instinctively, as something she wasn't supposed to hear. Each time she used the number. Each time it was answered. Cassian Varro did not explain to her, in those 4 months, the full shape of what he did or who he was, or what the city would look like without the particular balance he maintained. He was not the kind of man who explained himself preemptively, but piece by piece, in the way understanding builds when you're paying attention, Penny came to understand that the city of Harlow existed in a particular equilibrium, and that he was the reason for it, and that the reason people like Derek Pruitt ultimately had limits, the reason certain things didn't happen in certain neighborhoods, the reason some phone calls got answered and some doors stayed shut, was because of what he was and what he had chosen to build. She wasn't sure how she felt about that. She was sure how she felt about him. That was its own complication. It was a Sunday in February when he said what she'd understood for some time was eventually going to be said. They were in his kitchen. She'd been there twice before. Nothing significant. Coffee after a situation that had left her shaken, and the laundromat on Clover felt like the wrong amount of distance. He had a kitchen that looked like no one had ever used it for anything ordinary. All clean lines and expensive appliances, and a window that looked out over the city at night. He made coffee. She sat on the counter because there weren't bar stools, and she'd asked about it, and he'd said he didn't have many guests, and she'd said that tracked. I want to tell you something, he said. Okay, I'm not. He stopped. He set down the coffee. He turned and looked at her with the full attention he brought to things, and she understood this was costing him something. Not the admission itself, but the exposure of it, the act of wanting something and saying so out loud. I don't make decisions without understanding the cost of them, he said. I've been thinking about the cost of this for 3 months. What did you decide? She asked. That some things are worth it regardless. Penny Holt sat on the counter of a kitchen that didn't belong to her, in an apartment 14 floors above the city of Harlow, and looked at a man who ran a criminal empire with the precision of a surgeon and the stillness of something very old and very certain. You understand what I am, he said. It was not a question. I understand what I've seen, she said. I think that's different, Penny. I've seen you show up, she said simply. Every time. In 5 minutes, I've seen you know things and not use them against people. I've seen you let an insult go in a restaurant because it wasn't worth the cost to the person who said it. She held his gaze. I understand what the city says you are. I know what I've actually seen. The room was quiet. This is not a simple life, he said. Mine wasn't exactly simple before, she said. He crossed the kitchen to where she was sitting, and he stood in front of her with the precise and careful deliberateness of a man who has decided something and will not unsay it, and he said, very quietly, I will not let anything happen to you. That is not a reassurance. It's a fact. She believed him. That was the thing. That was the piece of it she'd been turning over for months. the thing that kept refusing to simplify into something she could argue herself out of. She believed him. She reached out and took his hand, not dramatically, not in the way people do in stories, just took it. "Okay," she said. He looked at their hands. Something shifted in his face, small, controlled, the way things shifted in him. "Entirely real, okay," he said. "What no one tells you about, stepping into a life like that is how ordinary most of it is. The city still exists, the coffee still gets made, the savings jar still sits on the counter, though she moved it to his place because it made her feel better to look at it, and he never asked why, just moved some things to make room for it on the shelf above his stove. RN by 30. He read it once, that first week, and didn't say anything. Just looked at it. A month later, there was an envelope on the kitchen table. Inside, a full tuition payment confirmation for Harlow Community College nursing program, her name, the following semester. No note. She stood in the kitchen for a long time. When he came in that evening, she was still standing there. "Cassian," she said. You can't just." She stopped. "This is too much. It's leverage," he said, pouring himself water with the perfect calm of a man who had decided this was a practical matter and intended to keep it that way. "If you're in school, you have a reason to stay close. It's entirely self-interested." She looked at him. "You're a terrible liar," she said, the small smile. "Only to you," he said. "Apparently." She crossed the kitchen, and she did what she'd been thinking about doing for 4 months, and she kissed him. And it was not a dramatic movie kiss. It was two people who had spent a long time being very careful suddenly deciding not to be careful about this one thing. He kissed her back with the same full attention he gave to everything. Completely, deliberately, without any part of himself held in reserve. Below them, Harlow went on being Harlow, loud and complicated and held together by things most people never thought to question. And in a kitchen 14 floors up, with a savings jar on the shelf and a semester confirmation on the table, and the city spread out below the window, like a secret the night was keeping, something new had started, something that was worth it, regardless of the cost. And if you want to know what happens next, what the city does when it finds out, what doors open and which ones slam shut, what it costs them both, and what they choose to pay, then make sure you're subscribed to Ava's Romance Library, because this story is just getting started. Leave a comment below. Do you think Penny was right to trust him, or is she in over her head? Let us know, and don't forget to like this video if you're already rooting for these two.